right, we're at 7 o'clock, and so we want to respect everybody's time who is here and ready to roll. The room stays open, and folks will, and I know sometimes internet decides to drop out just when you decided to join a meeting. So, feel free to bounce back anytime. I am Debbie Moss. I am the CEO at ACCBE. So thank you all for being here. We are recording this. It will be posted on our website a few days after the meeting, and it will be there with slide presentations that you see. And then everyone who registered will get an email as well that once it posts to the website. We get our webmaster to put it up there. So if you haven't already, please introduce yourself in the chat, your name, your county, and your role. So whether you're a trustee or superintendent or you're president of the board or you're just curious about the topic, welcome. And we will go ahead and get started. So our time tonight, we're going to do a little bit icebreaker and overview of ACCBE. And then Kristen and Gina will take the lion's share of the program. Of course, you're all here to hear those two, not me. And then we'll have a Q&A session at the end. And then Kristen and Gina, as you go along, however you want to handle Q&A as we go along, I totally defer that to you. And then we'll do a wrap up. And please hang on for an evaluation form. We have a short form. Really like to get people's input on what topics you would like to hear more on, and especially on this special education topic. There's questions raised for you, or you want to, maybe we get down a tangent or something you want to hear more, please let us know. Because the way we're able to deliver this programming is by hearing from our members about what they're interested in learning more about. So we are thrilled to announce that we have 45 members of ACCBE, of our county boards of education, and runs the gamut of the state. And Yvonne Chan is our membership chair, so big shout out to Yvonne. But this is a huge group effort here, and we appreciate all of our county boards of education that have joined ACCBE and shown your confidence in the work that we're doing here. So our mission is to be an empowering organization for county boards of education, and that they can be advocates for all the students we serve. So that is our sole focus, is county boards of education. And as the leading voice for boards of education, our goal, our vision is to continuously improve outcomes for students, their families, and the communities that we serve. Our goals, I wouldn't be a good CEO if I didn't take the opportunity to reiterate the goals that ACCB is built around. We advocate for the organization, and in fact, our advocacy committee is getting up and running with our legislative platform for 2026. So they have a lot of activity going on here in the next couple of months. Partners, we can't do this work without partners. County superintendents, of course. We have a number of groups that serve children in foster care and welfare, and a variety of other wraparound services, if you will, that serve the students that county boards of education are responsible for. So we find those partnerships, they exponentially impact the work that we can do together versus individually. And then, of course, tonight's program falls under our Engage, Elevate, and Empower. This is all about empowering our county boards of trustees. And then forward-looking, we are constantly looking on innovation and solution. And for those of you that haven't already heard, we do have 3 in-person conferences coming up. We'll talk about those at the end of the program. But our goal with those conferences is take the knowledge that ACCBE is putting out there in the form of workshops and education and really motivate our county boards to action. It's one thing to hear best practices, lessons learned, new legislation that's out, rules, laws, education code. It's another thing to put it into action. And so that's really our mission as part of our forward looking, is to equip our members to action. So with this, if you haven't already, if a few of you have joined us since we started and had the cover sheet up, if you haven't already, please introduce yourself in the chat, your name, your county, and your role. And then we would like you to put in the chat what questions about special ed are you coming to this session with? And also, if you would rate your knowledge of special ed. And I love that Bina came up with these, and I thought these were so clever. I was laughing when I was putting this slide together. Number two is my favorite. I know enough to be dangerous, but actually, I'm a number one because I know little to nothing. So I'm going to be glued to this presentation myself. So if you would all take a minute to put that in the chat. And Bina, before I turn the program over, any words of wisdom or introduction that you would like to add?
No, I did want to maybe recognize our three of our board members, David Patterson, Yvonne Chan, and Bev Gerard. So thank you guys for joining us.
Yes.
And we just are very grateful for you all for being here. We're just excited about the work that we're all doing together to support our kids. And I'll stop.
Judy, thank you for putting your answer in there. So please, as we're going along here, feel free to put in any questions that you have that you're coming to the session with, and also ranking 1 to 4, your knowledge of special education. So with that, I'm going to introduce Kristen and Gina, and I'm sure they won't mind, but we put these bios in the slides so that when you access them later on the website, you have the information about their background. So you know that they are very well qualified to speak on this topic. So we have both Kristen Wright, who's the Executive Director of Inclusive Practices and Systems at SCOE, affectionately known as SCOE, Sacramento County Office of Education. And then also Gina Plate, who's the Senior Vice President of Education for Devereaux Burr Group. And so with that, I am going to turn the program over to the two of you. Oops, excuse me. Let me take this down so you can share. There we go.
Fantastic. Thank you, Deborah. Appreciate that generous opening. I'm going to share my screen. And, oh, Kristen, you might have to do it. I got a new computer yesterday and it's not interested in working with me tonight.
Okay. Let me bring
I've
that.
got it set for multiple shares, so you should be able to.
This might work. Let's see. Nope.
Let me know if you need me to.
Okay, let me try one thing here. I think we're good. Let me go back now and try. There we go. That should work.
There you go.
Good work. Whoa, did I break a sweat? Wow, that was literally the last thing you want to have happen as you start a presentation.
That's why it's good to have partners in these kinds of things.
That's right. Exactly. Exactly. Well, before I take up the whole screen with my with the screen, let me just say thank you. We are honored to be here. Again, my name is Gina Plate, and Senior Vice President at the DeVoe Burr Group, which is a large government relations firm. And oftentimes people ask, what does that mean? What do you do? And so we represent lots of different sectors, tech, energy, insurance, but most importantly, education. And we help translate what happens in Sacramento to what you're doing on the ground and the most important work supporting kids and families. So excited to be here. I am going to hand it over to Kristen to do a brief bio about her work while I get our slideshow up and running.
Sounds great. Thanks, Gina. Gina and I have had the opportunity to be partners in crime for a number of years in many different regards, and both had an opportunity to chair the Advisory Commission on Special Education, which I think is probably the deepest dive anyone could do in state regulation and other things. Yvonne Chan knows. We spend a lot of time hearing from CDE and things like that. I guess I must have liked it because I ended up working there after my stint as the parent on the advisory commission, and somehow became the California State Director of Special Education for a stint. From there, Dave Gordon plucked me out of the CDE and I came to Sacramento County Office of Education. This is my 6th year there. Um, I do serve as the Executive Director of Inclusive Practices and Systems. And what does that mean? I have a whole team of people who work with schools and districts and families around inclusive practices and how to translate the work that Gina does at the Capitol and the laws that happen into practice, which we know is always a challenge for teachers to understand what exactly they're supposed to do. And so, with all this, we are excited, and I'm excited that you are interested in this topic because it is my deep belief that you play a critical role in being able to ask the right questions at the right time, in order to ensure some of our most marginalized students are getting what they need. So, um, as we start off, maybe we can ask you to each think about um, someone in your life that you know. This might be a family member, or a friend, or a neighbor, who was either born with a disability or someone who acquired a disability. And if you come from teaching or schools, maybe you had a student with a disability who stands out to you. Why are we picturing someone with a disability? Because the whole thing is in service to belonging and community engagement and belonging for people with disabilities once they leave school. So for a lot of our students and a lot of the ones we serve in county offices, they leave us at 22 and then they go sit at home. And this isn't just true of kids that leave county programs. The number of people and young people with disabilities that are at home, not doing much, or in a day program is still very high. So this is our opportunity to think about how we can collectively help raise the bar. And we'll talk today about some new laws and opportunities that will allow you to bring back to your districts and schools, actually your county, these questions. So picturing that person with a disability and all of this in the interest of belonging in our communities. Next slide.
Fantastic. Thanks, Kristen. As we get started here, I want to also remind folks that we are very casual. As Kristen mentioned, she and I have worked together for a long time, and we have also worked with many of you on the screen for a while. So, we're easygoing, we're casual. You can use the chat. We may or may not be tracking it, so just come off mute, raise your hand, and feel comfortable just putting your questions out there. And I will say this is a topic that folks often feel anxious or insecure about putting questions out there. And this is a safe place. This is a hard topic. These are sometimes dense or complex discussions. And so feel comfortable just putting any question out there to us.
And if we don't know it, or if it's too much of a legal question, we'll say, you know what, you should talk to your attorney at your county office because they can give you that exact information. So we won't try to be fake lawyers today.
That's right. That's right. All right, here are the things that we're going to learn tonight. The legal and moral why of special education, what your statutory role is as a county board trustee, what is the role of a SELPA, bonus points if you can put what SELPA stands for in the chat, an IEP, individualized education program, a county operated school and special ed programs, what falls under your purview, students with disabilities and how school discipline works. And then we're going to share some current trends, research, and best practices for you to take with you to refer back to later on. Kristen, is there anything in the chat? Can't see.
Nope, we're good. And and feel free to, like Gina said, put the questions in the chat and we'll try to answer them there. Or if you want to just shout them out, we're fine being interrupted at any time. And I see that there's 20 people, so I'm assuming a bunch of the folks have their cameras off and we're just not seeing them. So we may not see you if you are raising your hand or something because I guess we wouldn't see you anyway. So, yes. I will
Okay.
monitor the chat too.
Judith and Louise win the bonus points for tonight. Special Education Local Plan Area is the name or the acronym, what the
Mhm.
acronym SELPA stands for. All right. Like Kristen said, if you have any burning questions that you want to make sure we log and answer before the end of the night, please stick them in the chat.
And I saw that Bina put in there better understanding the changes to inclusion in the alt diploma. We love that. Those are our favorite recent
Yeah.
topics. So yes, those will definitely be included.
Good job.
Yeah.
Okay, so sometimes I used to joke that like the fastest way to clear a room is to say you're going to spend, the next hour talking about special education funding formula. I think another way to clear the room is to say, let me dive into the code and read code to you about what your obligations are. So I'm going to do it briefly. I'm going to do it quickly because all of you know your responsibilities in code as a county board trustee. So you make the rules and you approve the budget for a county office of ed. You oversee the superintendent of schools, and of course, I'm simplifying these. These are very complex issues, but for the sake of time, you hear charter school petitions, you hear charter school appeals, you hear interdistrict transfer appeals. You are responsible for county operated special ed programs, which we're going to dive into. That includes the court and community schools, the juvenile court schools, any special education day programs that your county offers. We're going to dive into that. And then lastly, you're responsible to implement the SELPA plan in collaboration with your local LEAs to ensure that there is access to all individuals with exceptional needs residing in that geographic region. So you're responsible for making sure that there is an option to have access of every student regardless of what their need is. All right. What's a SELPA? Well, we had a couple folks share the acronym, which is love it. Kristen, do you want to talk about the role of a SELPA?
Yeah, so every single LEA and a county office of education is considered an LEA, a local educational agency. Every single one in California has to belong to a SELPA. Why? Well, first of all, if you don't belong to a SELPA, you don't get any funding. All funding, all federal funding and state funding comes through the SELPA to the districts or county offices for their county office programs for special ed. So it's up to each individual SELPA to create this local plan where they're all working together in order to figure out what is the funding for, like basically the funding formula for that area. How much money is your SELPA going to keep for maybe extraordinary costs or, something happens, and how much is going to go out to each district, right? So it's really important, and your superintendents for your LEAs typically all sit on a committee and participate in it might be a little bit different for Del Norte, but because I think there's a lot of LEAs, so I think they do it by region. But most other places, they sit and they make an agreement, and then everyone signs the SELPA, and then you know how much you're going to get for that year. Now, for big districts like LAUSD and Long Beach and Elk Grove, they're a single district SELPA. So like we have Elk Grove in Sacramento County, but they're their own SELPA. So in our county SELPA, we have most of the smaller districts, right? Because our big districts are their own SELPA. We have the small districts and we have our county office. And that creates some economies of scale. So if we want to share services across them, because we don't have enough money to buy all the different services in any one individual small district, it can serve as an economies of scale. What does all this mean for you as a board member, though? What does it matter? Well, your county office has schools that are run by your county office, right? Your court and community schools, your special education programs. So your county office is a member of that county SELPA, along with the districts, like I said. So you definitely want to know what your SELPA plan says, because that's going to spell out the services that your SELPA in your county is providing. Okay. And so typically, your SELPA director is an agent both kind of the state. So if you think of it as an intermediary, the state gets money, it goes through the SELPA. The SELPA um, figures out what the local plan is with all the superintendents, and then it goes to the districts. Okay. And the SELPA is actually there to make sure that the districts are compliant, that they're turning in their data, that they're following IDEA, that they're helping them if anything that comes up that they need. A lot of them are on DA teams that are helping your districts that are in DA. And so um, those SELPA directors are typically like basically kind of hired by that board of superintendents. So they might work under a county office, but really their bosses are the superintendents that are in the SELPA, all of them. Okay. Next slide. So are they upholding? What is the SELPA and the state and then the federal government, the U.S. Department of Education? What are we trying to do for students with disabilities and what is our legal responsibility? All of that is set up in federal law from the IDEA. That started 50 years ago. In fact, this is the 50th anniversary of the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And that came about to ensure that students and people with disabilities had the right to education. Prior to that, um, that was not necessarily happening. Many people were at home. Um, a lot of young people were denied access, those types of things. And so, as part of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, you have to qualify, right? Anyone can't just become part of the IDEA or get an IEP. You have to qualify under one of these 13 categories that we're going to show you now. And so these 13 categories are the ones that define whether or not you are eligible to get an IEP, an individualized education program. And bonus points if you can tell us what qualifying disability category is the fastest growing disability category of all these 13.
Autism.
Autism, right. And
Yeah.
what we know about autism is that autism is a huge spectrum. So not everyone with autism needs an IEP, right? There are people that they call very high functioning autism that may have social needs, but academically, they're doing just fine, and they may not need an IEP. We have also students in many of our county programs who have very, very significant disabilities and that require a high level of support, right? And so in these disability categories, although you have to qualify and be eligible for them, we don't want them to define prescriptive things. So if you think about what was happening in 1975, we were very much subscribed to the medical model of disability, something that needed to be fixed, right? And we put kids in these categories and we said, okay, you're in this category and now we have to treat your disability because we're trying to mitigate your disability. Since that time, the disability community came out and said, disability is natural and impacts so many of us. And this is how we are. And we don't need to be fixed. We are who we are and we're proud of it. And so a lot of disability pride and disability activism has happened. And even more recently, many youth, even youth who are non-speaking, have found a voice. So we've moved from this medical model of disability into a social model of disability where we all have neurodiversity, we're all unique. But if I, as a person with a disability, want to be labeled and defined as a person with a disability, then I can. And I might call myself an autistic person or a deaf person, or I might choose to not share that with you, right? But all in all, still, according to federal law, you have to qualify under one of these qualifying disability categories, and then we provide services and we're required to by law. Now, our state law in California codifies all of these laws, meaning that people were worried, like, well, what if the IDEA goes away? Well, California still has very strong laws protecting the rights of people with disabilities. And I imagine we still would, regardless of what happens at the federal level. But these protections have been nice because then the state has something to bump up against. Next slide.
Kristen, where does ADHD fall in? Is that considered a disability?
So ADHD falls in the category of it really otherwise OHI sometimes it's in SLD, sometimes it's a secondary condition. Gina, what would you say about that?
Yeah, I think I've most often seen it under other health impairment.
Yeah. It sometimes goes along with other things like specific learning disability. Oftentimes you might
Mhm.
have someone with dyslexia or something that might also have another neurodiversity. Um, but what's interesting about that question, Bina, is that many times parents fight to have their kids identified in a particular category and not another. Because
Mhm.
sometimes if you're qualified as a student with an intellectual disability, your odds of being in a general ed class and having access to academics is very low. And as a parent, my daughter has very significant intellectual disabilities. I fought to have her qualify under multiple disabilities because she has physical disabilities also, because I didn't want to have a presumption of labeling of anyone presuming anything about her when she was 3 years old. So until we move away from sort of those prescriptive medical kind of model ideas, I think parents are going to continue to advocate for certain things. Now, parents of students, sometimes people of children that have autism or autistic-like behaviors want to be identified with autism because there's a lot of services attached to that, even through Medi-Cal, right? Any questions about that? All right, next slide.
Kristen, I'm glad you pointed out that these all of these disability categories have a continuum. And it makes me think back at the beginning of our call when we asked you all to think about somebody that you know that has a disability. I'm guessing the majority of you, like Kristen just talked about her daughter, the majority of you probably thought about someone that you have an emotional connection to. I think about my dad who is blind. I do not think about his disability first. And he does not want us to think about his disability first. He doesn't want us to think about it at all, actually, except to just keep him safe. And so I'll ask that you keep that in mind as we start talking about these different settings
Yeah.
and how we think about students or individuals alongside their disability.
Gina,
And so
This is Yvonne Chen here.
Hi, Yvonne.
Um, the category of dyslexia, I've heard that it will soon become the 14th category. Have you heard about that?
So there has been a big advocacy, as you know, and also in California specifically, especially with some of our elected officials being very open about their dyslexia. It's still you still qualify under specific learning disability, but in California, one of the things that we did in statute was the dyslexia lobby had us add in there
Mm-hmm.
dyslexia. So it's included within that specific learning disability, but it's not its own category yet. Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up, Iman.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Yvonne. And Kristen, thanks for that. The one thing I'll add also is last year, the governor added the mandatory reading screener. And initially, that was that dyslexia lobby group wanted an opportunity for us to identify dyslexia early. But the reading screener is now mandatory and it is meant to identify what reading challenges might a student have in grades K1, 2, I think it's K1, 2. Um, and that likely would then be a signal that they needed to be formally assessed for possibly dyslexia. So that's something in your districts and your counties you can ask about what your screener is that they've adopted to identify reading challenges.
Yeah, and I think that's also one other thing that you should know, and that Gina pointed out, which is that this is a screener. So what it's looking for is a predisposition for a learning disability. It doesn't mean that you might have one. You might just have a a challenge that needs to be addressed, and if it's addressed early, you potentially would not need to have special education services. So it's not meant to be like a pretest for special ed. It's
Mhm.
actually supposed to be a prevention mechanism to identify early enough so that students don't have to fall so far behind in their reading and then not get access to their grade level standards. So this has been a huge conversation and was a question like, are we going to have more kids that get identified for special ed because of this screener? And we
Mhm.
hope the answer is no. We hope maybe even less because we're going to give kids what they need and those interventions so much earlier. So next slide. So one of the things that is a huge topic in the state right now is inclusion. And why does this matter and why should this matter to county board members? So the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act makes us collect data as states about where kids are served and how they're doing. And one of the things they collect is called least restrictive environment, right? And least restrictive environment means the environment, an environment where the student would get the most access to their education to be able to do their best, right? And so for most students, that's the general education environment. But for all students, it's our job to make sure that every student has at least had a chance to access the general ed environment with supports and services before we remove them out of that environment and put them in a special education separate setting. And that's been a really big movement in California. I think Dave has a question. Go ahead,
Mhm.
Dr. Patterson.
Oh, there appears to be some discussion about some parents wishing to have sometimes less than what would typically be defined, say, in being placed, especially at a large comprehensive high school or something like that, where they're seeking what they think is an environment that is more nurturing for their child. At some point, if you could weave that in, that would be.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And just like any parent who wants to choose an environment for their student with or without a disability, many parents choose lots of different, they might choose lots of different models for their child depending on what they think their child needs. One of the things is we want to, we always want to honor our parents and what they want and feel is most, best instruction or best environment for their child. But as educators and as education entities upholding the law, it's our job to make sure that there are these inclusive environments so that students don't have to go outside of those environments to try to find that nurturing environment that you're talking about. So there will always be students who um, who are not going to be in the general education classroom all day, right? I think inclusion, we want to make sure we understand that inclusion doesn't mean everyone's in general ed all day, all the time. What we're after here is that every child has access to high quality learning and an environment where they can learn. And for some students, classrooms in comprehensive high schools of 35 to 40 kids is too much. But that's also true for kids without disabilities, right? Which is why parents choose other schools or homeschool or independent study or whatever. So, one of the things we just have to consider, like in our IEP meetings, is what is Shelby? I'll use Shelby as my daughter's example. What is her neighborhood school where her brothers and sisters go? Is that school, how would we include Shelby in that school? And if for whatever reason, Shelby, we tried every possible way we could think to include her, and she was not being successful. She was overstimulated. She was, screaming all day. We tried everything, then we might want to try other environments for Shelby, right? Or other, but the bottom line is that we don't start with that other environment necessarily. We start with thinking about how we can include Shelby, because that's what the IDEA is asking us to do. Because it says special classes, separate schooling, or other removal of children with disabilities from the regular classroom only occurs if the nature or severity is such that the education in the regular classroom with the use of supports and services cannot be achieved satisfactorily. So that tells us they're saying we think everyone should have an opportunity to be included,
Mhm.
right? And a lot of parents I know are either scared for their children, right? That they're not going to be safe, or that their children either they I just heard my daughter come home, sorry about that. Um that they're not safe, or that somehow there's another environment that would be more geared towards their needs. And so that may or may not be true, but I'm going to put a pin in that because that's something you should think about as county board members is if a student's not going to go to their neighborhood school and they're going to come to one of our county programs in our county school or in the district that we're having MOU with, right? Those classrooms should be amazing. Those classrooms
Mhm.
should be that student's least restrictive environment. So if they can't make it in general ed, we should have a place that is utopia for them, right? Because we want somewhere for them to learn. Next slide. So this is a question for you, and you can put this in the chat. Which IDEA disability categories from the previous slide require the learner to be educated in a separate environment or more restrictive environment? Maybe we can go back, Gina, to that list. Which of all,
Ah,
oh, we
oh
told you, we told you. Oh, well.
no,
Okay, well, you know the answer now. The answer is none. But I think if someone would have asked me this question before I had my daughter, I would have probably told you like two or three of the categories. Like there's no way that certain groups of students, even students with emotional disabilities, I would say, "Oh, that would never work." The reality is there's a continuum of needs, just like there's a continuum of placements, right? So there's no disability category requires um, a student to be in a separate setting, even emotional disabilities. And by the way, side note, last year in state statute, we changed the name of emotional disturbance to emotional disability. So in California, we refer to students as having emotional disabilities, not emotional disturbance. Because one of the things we found is that students were being labeled and people were saying those words out loud, even in front of students in IEP meetings. And that was really harmful for their psyche.
Mhm.
So, all of our jobs as public agency folk is to ensure that, to the maximum extent appropriate, kids with disabilities are educated with children who are not disabled. So, when we're thinking about um, our programs, it doesn't mean we can't have county programs that serve students with disabilities, but we have to ask ourselves, how do we make sure that we're working with our districts to make sure they're getting opportunities to be included? Because what happens when they leave school is nobody knows them. They go
Mhm.
back into their community, and this was true for my own daughter. You go back in your community, and people are like, "Where did you come from? We've never been in school with you. We don't understand, your idiosyncrasies or your behaviors." And it makes it a lot harder to be included and feel a sense of belonging. Next slide.
Mhm.
So again, this is just that reminder that um, that removal piece tells us, and this is in federal law again, that removal piece tells us that general ed is where we should be thinking first. It doesn't mean that something is bad if a student's in a county program or, being served in a non-public school. It is bad if no one ever thought that they could have an opportunity to not. And I think the question is if they're in a placement, is that a forever placement or are we working towards integrating them back in the community because that's where they're going to be for the next 60 years after they leave us?
Mhm.
Next slide. So the other thing you should know as board members is that we're not supposed to be using any kind of funding mechanism that distributes funding based on the type of setting. So in the past, many years ago, there was almost what were considered incentives to send kids to more restrictive settings. Um, we don't want to have any incentives that send kids to any particular setting. However, we do want to make sure they're supported in whatever setting they're in. So you might hear sometimes that inclusion is expensive. It might be, but so is being in separate settings. That's also really expensive. So it just depends on how we're allocating funds and thinking about what we want. And even if it's more expensive, the out what you get from outcomes might be worth it, right? And that's why you have special ed funds that are in addition. And this is a good point, actually, Gina. Every student with a disability receives LCFF funding, every single one. They're general ed students first, and then they receive special ed funding on top of that, right? And in California, special ed funding is determined not by individual student, but by how many students are in that district or LEA. So if you have 100 students in your total LEA, then you'll get a certain amount based on that 100 students, not based on how many students with disabilities you have, because they didn't want anybody to have an incentive about that to identify more students. Right now, 15% of the students in the state, essentially between 14 and 15, are students with IEPs. That has gone up every year a little bit over the last, I don't know, 5 to 10 years. Part of that's due to the autism increase.
Mhm.
Dave, I see your hand.
Yes, having lived through the prior to 602 funding
Yep.
model and now 602, it seems that we're running back into the same dilemma that some of our underlying districts have a significantly higher identification rate. And, 602 was, and the general funding model was to make sure somebody didn't over-identify on purpose. Here, a district can be um, subject to a higher percentage and it doesn't and it harms them. Could you talk a little bit about, that dilemma that, no matter what you do, you get stuck. And the reality is for some of in our counties, some of our districts are struggling much, much more with special ed costs than others.
Yeah, and it is highly problematic what you're talking about because there are some districts that are up to, in the 17%, and these are some of our larger districts that have a higher concentration of students with even more significant disabilities. It's something for you to think about as county boards in terms of your own advocacy around bringing this question to the forefront. I know your districts would probably appreciate it too, to
Mhm.
ask if the way that we're funding special education is actually appropriate still based on what our current scenario is. Because it was a lot. I mean, we were at 11%, a decade ago. So it's gone up significantly, the number of students with disabilities and the number that require more extensive support. So, it brings up a question about should there be something in the base and then something else for more extraordinary costs for students who have more extensive needs? Are there ways? Most of the students with extensive support needs are students who have been disabled since birth. They're students who were born with multiple disabilities or autism or other things. Um, and so to that point, it's not an incentive there. We already knew they were disabled. People are not trying to go back, to get extra money, or they wouldn't try to get extra money just to show that you had more students, I don't think, with autism or other disabilities. So it's a really good question, and it's one that deserves some
Mhm.
more conversation and for some folks to bring it up exactly like you did.
That's right.
Because we
And
also don't want what we're seeing right now is it's pitting parents against parents
right.
and parents saying, why are your kids taking all the money from the general fund? Now, I would argue the comeback to that is my student earns LCFF funding too,
Correct.
right? So it is a difficult conversation, but you hear a lot that there's a local contribution or encroachment on general ed. I have a hard time with that statement, but I think to your point, Dr. Patterson, that makes, it's something you guys might want to think about.
All right, before I click the next slide, any thoughts, questions? I know we've given you a lot of information so far. Anything burning in the mind that you want to put out there?
This is Bina. I just to clarify. So there's LCFF funding that's the same for every kid. But for special ed kids who need more services, is that where the federal special ed money comes in?
So for students with disabilities, basically they look, like I was saying, they look at all the students like an economies of scale model, and they give you a certain amount of dollars in your from through SELPA to spend on special education.
Okay, so it's money from the SELPA that provides those
Yes.
extra
Now,
services.
there are extraordinary cost there is an extraordinary cost pool, but it's not very big, and it's for very specific reasons around low incidence disabilities. Um, and so, it is a question about should there be a larger extraordinary cost pool? Some SELPAs um, save some of their money collectively so that if you have a student that has to go to a non-public school or something like that, the SELPA will help pay for it. But that's all defined in local plans, so it's a little bit different across the state. But I think and you all have gone back and advocated at the federal level, and we keep asking for full funding for special education. Um, I don't know that that's ever going to truly occur. So in the meantime, how do we think about this in a little bit of a different way? Because the majority of students with disabilities don't require um, tons of extensive supports. That's a much smaller number of the students with disabilities.
What, what seems to happen, you get your LCFF money, then you get your special ed money, but usually that's not enough. So you have excess costs uh, uh, given back to the districts, and they're beginning to cry, when does this end? Because it goes up and up and up every year.
Yeah, it's true. It's absolutely true. And it definitely hasn't caught up with the cost of living either. So in addition to the fact that we don't get full funding under the IDEA that was always promised, but we have all these mandates, um, many would argue exactly what you're saying. Yeah.
Gina, this is Yvonne.
Good.
Okay, so aside from the funding, here's another, roadblock that we have to figure out on inclusion regarding staffing. Okay, so I mean, when the kids are in, I hate to say special day class and pull out, in my days, even, those of us with a credential, with resource, will be teaching what? Chemistry or whatever, we have to kind of do more like a single subject teacher. Okay. So in the inclusion setting, that especially those of us in the court schools and in the halls, getting single subject teacher or trying to include them in big high schools. Is there some way about rethinking staffing in terms of the way we can better meet the needs of the individual IEPs instead of A through G and all that, graduation requirement? Because staffing is something that we really come into roadblock. And I, like Dave, I also heard that, there just may be a switch to go back to the old days, the non-602 money. Not every kid gets the 602 money. It will be back to a cell per unit. For every 24 kids, bang, you got 120,000. So can you comment on staffing? How are we going to resolve that?
Do you want to take that, Jeannie, or want me to?
No, go right ahead.
So a couple things. You mentioned inclusion, right? And one of the ways around one of the challenges that, especially at high school, that we're facing now, because all students are supposed to have access to their grade level standards and course requirements for high school. We do have a number of pathways now that allow for exemption of students with disabilities or that are other things from the A to G. So if you're a foster youth, you're a military youth, you're an unhoused youth, or you're a student who takes the alternate assessment, you are not required to meet anything beyond the statewide requirements for high school. And those courses are very doable over 4 to 6 years if you have longer as a student with disability. For in terms of the content, one of the ways that schools are, and this is not necessarily true in court and community schools, because I think that's a whole different challenge because you have very few students, but you have maybe a lot of content need across those students. But in any comprehensive, in any LEA at a high school, if you are able to include the students with disabilities with the content teacher and that special ed teacher is working with them to be able to modify the curriculum there, um, that's kind of the ideal. Now, the staffing piece, the shortage we're facing around special education teachers with ed specialists, that's one of the most confounding pieces right now. And so it's why some districts are saying that they're making more special day classes because they don't have enough staff to be able to go out and co-teach and do all the things they need. They just don't have enough teachers with ed specialist credentials to be able to do that. Um, there's some work going on right now and some legislation from last year that's really looking at the dual credential teachers that have both general and special education credentials to help prepare teachers to feel more able to serve every type of student. And the common trunk that the teacher credentials have now was designed to do that, to help teachers learn more about neurodiversity and inclusion and things like that. Um, we're still facing, and I don't know if you've heard from Derek at California County Superintendents about, they did a bill last year around substitute teachers. I don't know if you were all
Mhm.
like SCOE is. It's very difficult to
No, they
find
haven't
subs.
done.
And then once you find them, they
Mhm.
can only stay for 20 days, and then you have to keep cycling them through. And that legislation didn't pass. It sounds like there's some want to continue to have that conversation. I think CTC's weighing in on it this week. Um, to try to address. There's just a myriad of issues related to staffing that confounds the problems around supporting students with disabilities. So I think it's a really good point. I don't know that there's a good answer yet, but I know that there's a lot of projects around in a lot of the resource projects that the state has right now are focused on making sure new teachers have inclusive opportunities so that they can start to understand better how to support all students in their classrooms. That's a huge push.
Thanks for that question, Yvonne.
We supported that bill last year.
Mm.
ACCBE
Oh,
did
fabulous.
to
Oh,
increase
fantastic.
the sub time.
Oh, that's great. So if you're looking at this is the continuum of placements. So in the IDEA, here's all the placements from least restrictive regular classes to most restrictive. Where do you think your county operated programs fall on this continuum for students with disabilities? Anybody have an idea? Or maybe in multiple places on this continuum.
I don't see anything in the chat. Feel free to come off mute.
Any ideas?
I would say in multiple places,
Yeah.
Good.
because a child may be on hospital and home care, and so you have to provide it in their home. We've got special schools for the deaf and all that kind of stuff. We've got special classes, whether it be a pullout or whether it is a real special day. And then some kids are hospitalized or institutionalized, non-public
Right.
schools.
Yep. So your students that are in court and community schools have a very high percentage overall of IEPs. In some places, it's 50%. Some place in some of the halls, 50% of the students in there have IEPs.
Mhm.
Obviously, that's the most restrictive environment while they're in there. But then it's a question, when they're not in there anymore, what are they going into the court and community school? Are they in like the foster system? Many end up being in non-public schools um, that are not served in traditional settings. So that regular classes is like your neighborhood school in a general ed classroom, right? Many of you have many special day classes on school sites that are not that are still technically not the school, right? So like at SCOE, we have a Foundations Academy and we serve satellites at 30 something school sites in the county. Those would be considered kind of in between special schools and special classes because it's a school. If you look at it, it serves all kids with disabilities, the whole thing, right? But it's satellites and they're in special classrooms because most of them are not included in general ed in any way. Did you have a question, Dr. Patterson?
I think it was Michael. We saw your hand up.
Yeah, somebody's hand was up.
We're kind of different up here in Del Norte because we are a one-on-one, and our county office does nothing with special education. It's only our unified school district.
Mhm.
And almost all of ours are, we have a few special classes, and the regular class with
Yep.
it. And as a special education teacher, I go to those classes, and I'll tell you right now, when you're talking about staffing, it's difficult to hire a special education teacher from another state.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible. It's easier us most. We have 3 or 4 special education teachers we've hired from the Philippines because we can't hire them from Oregon, and they're just across the border and they kind of walk to, and they want to work for us. And we can't do it because of they don't want to have to go back to school to learn other things that California requires for out-of-state teachers.
Yeah.
And it's a big issue with it.
Yeah.
And, like I said, I'm looking to get off the school board to go back into the special education classroom.
Well, your services are definitely needed. That's for sure.
Definitely
when I first
needed.
moved here, I did that. I came out of retirement and did it for a couple of years.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. No, it's certainly necessary. So anyway, so basically that idea of LRE is that we're supposed to be thinking about as an IEP team that regular class first and then moving down the continuum from there. So the home hospital is really the most restrictive, right? Because you're not seeing anyone. You're at home or you're in the hospital. Next slide. And just to reflect, the placement is supposed to be reviewed every year. So it's required by federal law that every kid has an IEP meeting at least once a year. It can happen more. Sometimes people call meetings every month because things are not working out. And it's supposed to be as close as possible to make sure that the parent can come. Now, it's kind of nice now because there's a lot of places, especially like up where you live, Michael, where sometimes Zoom meetings make more sense because parents live really, really remotely, right? 2 or 3 hours from the Southport County office. Um, and again, that starting with general ed, unless the child's IEP requires otherwise, they're supposed to be educated in the school that they would be attending if they were not disabled. And there's been a lot of case law about that students have a right to attend a general ed classroom. And that's been upheld over and over again. So that ship has sailed. Although we still see a lot of litigation around least restrictive environment for parents who really want their children included.
Right.
Next slide. And I think we can move through some of these. I know this is a lot of going into LRE. But just if you remembered one thing, remember this. Special education is actually not a place. It's a set of services that are supposed to be delivered wherever the student can be get the most benefit, right? Where they can access their education in the best way possible for them. Next slide. Okay. So what should you be maybe attending to? We're talking about what are some of those evidence-based and best practices we're talking about. Well, so much of what you're hearing right now in the world is around learner variability. The fact that we all learn in different ways at different speeds, we have different preferences, and that it would be really boring if we were all the same, doing the same thing, right? And that whole idea of learner variability, how many know that some of your schools and districts are doing universal design for learning, or hopefully they are? Does that ring a bell? UDL? So this idea of UDL came out of work that was done at Harvard, at CAST, which is a institute at Harvard. And we're just going to watch a quick video so that you can get a little more versed, and then we can just not hear me talking. Go ahead, Jim.
Orchestras. Often schools act as if what we really want are clarinet players, and everybody else is a failed clarinet player. And in fact, what the culture needs and what orchestras needs is a great diversity of the kind of instruments you can play. We are all on spectra, many spectra. That's the way the nervous system really works. It's not a categorical thing. The nervous system works as a whole, and it works along many dimensions, all of which we're different on. So understanding these dimensions, these spectra, is important not only to identify people's difficulties, which are always contextual, but to understand how do we optimize their strengths as well. So individuals with autism are on a number of spectra, but one of which is they're hyper connected, which in many respects is very good, but it means they're often overwhelmed by the amount of sensory stimulation that comes in. Now, there are other individuals, and I think of them as on the same spectrum, which are more like myself, who are actually understimulated most of the time. We're looking for more stimulation, more novelty. The far end of that are people with ADHD, for whom it's called neophilic. They're looking for novel. Look, give me something new, because their nervous system is mostly underwhelmed. Autistic kids are looking, how can I reduce the amount of stimulation? Kids in ADHD are like, how can I get more stimulation here? We typically in Universal Design for Learning talk about it. What we want to graduate are expert learners, people who know how to learn, but that means know how I learn, not how we learn in average, and can do that in any context. Laws are changing, ideas are changing about education that say, no, we need to expand the channels that are available so that we don't pathologize kids, that we in fact recognize that disabilities are inherent in the ways that we're teaching. And schools have difficulty with that. Still has a feeling of we're trying to standardize students, make them more the same. The future must be that we are trying to destandardize students to in fact discover what they're good at. This is a really good violinist, but probably not a good percussionist. Let's amplify their strengths and prepare them for being in an orchestra rather than soloist.
So does this resonate?
Well, it does even with regular kids, because years ago, didn't they do it by colors? Some were visual, some were tactile, some were hearing learners.
Yep.
That's right.
Right. So the more that we are, as you all are going to your districts and schools to look at programs, this is what we're looking for, right? We're looking for um, teachers and situations where all learners can thrive. And so this new commitment to universal design for learning means that teachers set up their lesson plans by design for all the different types of students in their classroom. And it's kind of amazing now with AI that you can give AI your lesson plan and say, I need to make sure that these types of students can access this. And then you get all these ideas. In the past, we had to like think of them all ourselves and go Google all these images online and print them out and do all the things. We have so much better technology now where even our general ed teachers are saying we can actually do these modifications to our instruction because we have AI to be able to do that.
So Kristen, as a county board member, what I'm hearing is I should be asking questions, probably mostly focused on our court community schools, asking, like, are our teachers being trained in universal design for learning? And how are we doing that in the classroom so every kid's special learning style gets addressed? Or am I on the right track about?
Well, yeah, and you're exactly right. And a lot of the reason why students end up in our court and community schools is because they didn't feel connected to their education, right? They may have had a significant learning disability. Oftentimes they did, and they weren't reading at grade level and they didn't feel like they were connected. And so, when you're not connected, you don't come to school or you try to get out of school. And so there's a really deep connection with literacy and behavior and communication and behavior. So I will take what you said, Bina, and raise you one and say we should expect all of our special day classrooms to be beautiful, accessible classrooms of learning for our most significantly challenged students. And those teachers should also be grounded in universal design for learning. And we should see so much learner variability acknowledged. We should see all of our students who are nonverbal having communication devices and being able to be learning how to communicate what they know and feel, because that's our job before they leave, is to prepare them to be able to do whatever they want when they go. Even our students with like, the ones that we typically serve in county offices, which have the most extensive support needs. So we already talked about this. So we know special ed's not a place, it's services and supports. And supports are above and beyond what all students get. But think about this. If all students had more universal design, the need to be able to change up things and make all these extra things would be less for our students with disabilities because they're already by design, the lessons are designed for them too. So, think about newcomers or students with English that are English learners also. Many of them have disabilities too, but think about English learners. When they're planned for, I went to visit a school yesterday that had a newcomer in the classroom, and I asked the teacher, why do you have everything in English and Spanish? And they said, well, if we had everything only in English, our newcomer wouldn't be able to be learning the math that we're learning right now. So they had the transcription turned on, and everyone was able to see what and know what the teacher was saying. That was planned for, and that was on purpose. And that student was doing the math problems. The last thing is around the special ed 101, this piece is that special education does not have to be permanent. Kids can exit special education. You don't have to stay there forever, right? You may not need the supports after, if your supports were around like reading and you got up to grade level in reading and you didn't need them anymore, you don't, kids can exit out of special ed. They don't often exit, but they can. The other thing I want to leave you with is that the words that we're using around students with disabilities have also changed. And so the things that we're saying right now are no longer, we're not calling them special needs students. We're not saying SDC students. We're really acknowledging that they're students with disabilities. Um, and just like any other student that comes along with whatever challenges or supports necessary for them. And then we have to ask ourselves when we're talking about students with disabilities, when is it important to refer to them even with their disability, right? They're all students. We know all students are general ed students. And when we need to, we refer to their disability. So we're really working hard in the state to erase those terms that other students, right?
Mhm.
Very nice.
So I think we went through all these, right? Um, the last two, do you want to talk about those, Gina?
Yeah, absolutely. So you've probably heard the acronym FAPE, the free and appropriate education. And Kristen, why don't you talk about FAPE and how they might think about that as a county board trustee?
Yep. So under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, a free and appropriate public education um, is guaranteed, right? And in order for you, your role as a county board member is to ensure that the students that are under your purview are receiving that. Because if they're not receiving a free, appropriate education, then that's when us as a system are in violation of federal law. And that's when you either see a lawsuit or you see the CDE come and tell you you're not compliant, right? You're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. And all those rules are kind of spelled out in the IDEA. And a lot of that has to do with whether or not a student's receiving the accommodations and modifications that the IEP, Individualized Education Program, says they should get. So if I need, um, so if one of my accommodations is that I need paraeducator support and you don't provide paraeducator support for a year and I'm just in the classroom and things are happening and I'm not learning, then you're on the hook as a board and as an LEA, an organization, that you're not providing what my IEP said I needed. So it's really important, and all of our special ed directors and sub directors know this, that we are making sure that the IEP, everything in the IEP is happening. And this for you guys is extra important when you're thinking about the students who are coming into our juvenile halls and our court community schools because they're coming over and things are happening quickly, right? And so we have to make sure that when they come over, that we get their IEPs really quickly. And there's some laws and regulations around that, but it never is an excuse that the courts care about, that the district didn't send us their IEP. We're supposed to be able to get access to their IEP and be able to, as quickly as possible, start giving them their accommodations in school in juvenile hall, right? And so, one of the things that we also have to be careful of, and this is something we worked on in our own county office, is that we had separate classrooms for students with disabilities in the hall. And we had to ask ourselves, why do we have separate classrooms when they're already incarcerated in the hall? Why would we ask the kids with disabilities to get up and walk out to another classroom when we can serve these small size classrooms of kids with our special ed and general ed teacher co-teaching together? So we're doing a lot of work around making sure that all of our students are learning and getting access to high quality standards and learning together, because we don't want to have to label kids, especially in front of other kids, that we don't need to.
Nice. Okay, I want to do a bit of a time check. I was in looking at the time. Deborah, you had a couple agenda items after we spoke tonight, and I want to make sure, I know we've had some questions and comments as we've gone, but want to make sure we also take a time, if there's other questions that are coming up, that we give you that opportunity to do that. So I'm going
Please.
to open it. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
please take the time you need for the program material.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. So let me just open it up to see, are there any questions, thoughts? What's resonating for you now? Anything new that you're hearing that you want to just bounce around with the group? Louise, thanks for your hand.
Thank you. I have a question, and it's more needing words. I came into a situation that had nothing to do with my county board. I'm on an education foundation board that supports our schools. And with our transitional kids, there's a workability program that helps them to find appropriate jobs for them as they transition out of school and into the community. And one of the barriers is kids can do the jobs that they're placed in, but they have sometimes there's transportation issues. And some of these students are able to drive, but one of the barriers is getting them calm enough to drive. So the workability program teacher asked for some driving simulators, which I thought was a great use of a donation to support that, to help kids get to work. I was stunned when several of the board members opposed it because it wasn't for all kids. It was only for some kids. So, Kristen, you talked about that a little bit. What are the words I can use to explain that some kids need different supports?
So this may or may not resonate in some areas of the state, but saying that there is a difference between equity and equality.
Mhm.
Equality is that everyone gets the same thing, regardless of whether they need it or not. Equity means that everyone gets what they need so they can all achieve at similar levels, right? And so,
Yeah, I live in one of those areas of the state.
yeah. So, okay, you don't want to use that word then. So, I think what you say is that everyone does not have the same needs, and it's our job to make sure that all students get what they need. And so, this actually came up a lot when iPads first came out, and students with disabilities were getting iPads for their like communication and other like technological reasons. And folks were saying, well, it's not fair that they get an iPad and this other student doesn't gets an iPad. One way to look at it is that, I mean, to the best we can, it would be great to get all the students everything they need, right? I mean, and if there are things, now we know iPads are one of those things that everyone can have as an accommodation, or if they need to use it, they can. To your point about simulators, maybe it's that, they're used for the students with disabilities when they need them, and then they're open to some other folks when they don't. So it's I think it just depends on that particular situation if you can't use the equality versus equity. But the bottom line is that that is what equity means, is that some people need different things at different times. And when you explain it to kids, they actually understand it. Like, you don't need this right now. And you are able to learn to drive on your own because you don't have this anxiety issue. But if you do, you need these other accommodations.
Thank you.
I don't know if that's helpful, but I mean, usually I explain it that the first way that I realize is controversial.
Thanks for the question, Louise.
Yeah. And when I think of better words, I'll email you and tell you.
Thank you.
Nice.
This is
Anyway.
Yvonne. I'm sorry that my raised hand doesn't work. Okay, so we have, as you know, county boards takes appeals for interdistrict attendance, right? So you have parents come in, will say, okay, I would like my child to go from making it a Pasadena to San Marino. But San Marino say, no, we cannot accept it because we're too full in special ed. Then the parents say, oh, we'll give up our IEPs, right? Give up IEPs. But what you're saying is really resonate with me is it is not a place. It is a service. It's a service. It's okay. And of course, the LACO usually, by the time they get to us, we approve probably 100% of it because from 1,500, we get it down to like 200. By that time at 9 o'clock, we say, okay, go wherever you want to go. Do whatever parents make you happy. So as the child go to the district who don't want them, but we overrule it, they went there. Then the process is, can the parent then say, okay, now I gave them my IEP. Did they sign something? Or, well, the kids did well, maybe, okay, in a smaller school district, vice versa, whatever it is. But when there's a need, they can anytime bring up or bring back the IEP, couldn't they? Or has to go through the whole new assessment?
That is a great legal question. What I will say, and I don't know the exact legal answer to that, Yvonne, about um when they do or don't. What I do know is there are parents who sign settlement agreements
Mhm.
to either go somewhere or do some different things. Um, but I think at the end of the day, it's based on the individual needs of the child and their disability. Um, so I would be curious to find out if there's case law on it or what the law says about that, and I'll definitely look at that. But I'm not sure. I don't know if others um, know the answer to that, but I haven't really had to deal with that much, or even at the state I didn't. But it's a really good question because I can see that happening a lot. And I know, especially for districts that have really good reputations, I have heard from them that they're getting an onslaught of people trying to come to their district and leaving their other district because their services are so much better. And but I don't know the legal pieces that I don't know, Gina, if you know.
I don't, but I do think it's a really good
It
question
is.
and have heard it. And I know that there's a couple county offices that have grappled with how do we handle this onslaught. And so it's a good idea for us to go back and do a little research and then we can report back to you
We'll come back when you invite us back for part 2.
for part 2.
I see
Judith,
Judy.
thanks. Oh, go ahead, Vina.
No, I know Judy has
Oh, yeah.
a question.
I wondered two things, what the legal caseload is for the various special ed teachers. Do speech therapists have so many and single, not special day classes, but just the pullouts? And then I thought if your child wanted to go to a different school, if they said they were full, that they have that opportunity to say you can't come. But I like the question. My question would be the same as Yvonne's. What if they say, well, I'll do away with my IEP. Can I then come to that school? And then what happens?
It's a great question.
Yeah, it's a great question.
Was there a first part of that question that I?
The legal case.
Oh, the
Oh, the
caseload.
caseloads, right?
Right. So right now, the only caseload that's in statute for teachers, special ed teachers, ed specialists is 30, class size of 32 for RSP, I believe, unless something new's happened. Gina, do you know?
I think that is correct.
I thought it was 24 on the EDCO
No.
average, no?
Mm-mm.
Because,
It's
well,
32 for how many are on your caseload. I don't know. Other than that, I know there's a limit of, I think, I don't know if the one for speech therapists changed, but it was 56.
I think it's 50. I'd have to check.
Yeah.
I know
We'll
it
write
was.
that down to circle
Yep.
back with you guys on too.
But they do
We'll give
have
you a little.
a caseload limit.
but also, Judy, what happened is some SELPA in the districts within that have a settlement or a union contract
Yeah.
that
That's
locks someone
absolutely
too.
true. There have been a lot of negotiations in districts these last few years about caseloads, and if you're over a certain amount, how much more money, you get per student and lots of things. So we've seen a lot of unions put those in contracts. Yeah.
Unions, do they limit caseload too?
The chat says RST caseloads is 28.
It's 28.
Oh yeah, 28. I'm sorry, you're right, 28.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep, thank you.
Yeah.
I don't know where I got 32. Yes, 28.
Well,
made that
but
up.
maybe you're right. In my time and your time is when we had year-round school. Year-round school one. But that,
Thank you, Yvonne, but I think I was wrong. I think it was always 28.
yeah, because we only have three
But thank you
tracks
for
on,
someone who
one
actually
track
knew.
off.
I believe you can get it wavered up to 32. I think that's what 32 is.
Thank you, Dave. Yes,
Yeah.
appreciate that.
Yeah.
And then the other part of the question was if the student really wants to transfer to that school, or the parent, and they say, I'll give up my IEP, does that negate the school is full, or they can't take them?
That is the golden question. I don't think
No.
I don't think so, but I don't know. I'm really not sure the exact legal piece to that.
Yeah, I think it's
We're
worth
gonna
us
find
going
out though,
back.
huh, Gina? We're gonna
Yeah.
find out. We're gonna let
It's
you
worth
know.
us going back, and we'll add that into part 2.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, and Michael, did I see your hand up again? Wait, did I miss it?
The question was answered. That
The
was
caseload.
28 up to 32
Oh,
with
yeah,
the
thank you.
teacher's permission.
That's okay. Thank you.
Ah, that's
right.
right.
Yep.
That's right.
Teacher permission and an additional assistant.
Right.
There are all kinds of
Not
deals going out there.
necessarily. That's a contract issue
That's a
because, like I say, right now, being a teacher, the CTA and their unions have really came down in their local districts or counties to limit the caseload. But state law is basically the 28 to 32 with
Yep.
teacher permission.
Yep. And
Michael?
there have been efforts to try to help to try to limit how many students, especially with extensive support needs, can be in a special day class. But that's more negotiated, I think, than it's not in state law.
Yeah. I was going to say, Michael, with his role as a trustee, but indicating that he might want to go back into the classroom and demonstrating all of his knowledge on this call, might get a job offer before the end of the night tonight. You got to be careful.
I'm telling you, for real.
I don't have enough time, but that's where I'd rather be, is in a classroom.
Gina, can you?
I just attended an IEP training today because our district is now putting on a parent empowerment for special education on 6 different sessions, teaching the parents what the IEPs are and what goes into it to get that communication.
I love that. That's
and
fabulous.
so
Yeah, that's fabulous.
okay.
And your SELPA directors, they're good people. They can really help with that training piece if you feel like there's, a piece.
We have a really good special education director, Jennifer Armstrong, is with us now, and she's excellent.
It makes a huge difference.
It does.
Yeah. Gina, can you go to slide 32? I know we're almost out of time, but I want to make sure just to cover a couple things with you guys before we let you go.
Yeah.
And that's the one, how you show up matters. So we want to make sure to leave you with some questions that you could be asking as a board member, right? So if you go back one, yeah. Um, and this is really to think about not just your court and community schools, but also your county operated programs, like even your special day classes, right? Because even though most of the students in those classes, if you're like SCOE, their data at the LEA level rolls back to their district. So, um, but at school level, they still show up at the county. So for like the SIPSA and for how they're being served, their school is a school of the county office, right? Their district data rolls back to the district. So, the questions can be things like, are all of the students we're serving getting access to their grade level standards? That's an important question because even students with the most extensive support needs are supposed to be getting access to their grade level standards. Because now those same students with extensive support needs, significant cognitive disabilities under the law, have access to a high school diploma in California. That is new. That's happened in the last 4 years. And folks should be rolling that out now. And so there shouldn't be any student who starts their journey in education being on a certificate track. There is no certificate track because there's no requirements for a certificate. A certificate is a default. Everyone is on a diploma track, even our students with the most significant cognitive disabilities. Federal law allows us to issue diplomas if they are receiving standards aligned coursework and meeting their high school course requirements. Okay. And that's a very new concept for a lot of our special day classes. And it's exciting because it allows you to ask that question. Are all the students we're serving getting access to their grade level standards? And if not, how are we planning on doing that even through high school? And are those classrooms using evidence-based practices like UDL to ensure they're getting access? And then finally, are there clear academic expectations leading to a high school diploma for all of them? And again, there may be some students with the most significant disabilities who might be the extenuating circumstances, like we hear a lot about, like really medically fragile students um, who are not able to get all of their coursework in by the time they leave, which is 22. That's a long time. You have, 8 years between 14 and 22 to get your high school coursework. And why wouldn't we want them to leave with a diploma, right? And so the final question for you is, and this is when you go into your special day classes for visits, is to look around and ask, do all of the students that we're serving have a way to communicate what they want and know? Because if we could leave, if they could leave the K-12 system with anything, what if we made sure every single one of them had a way to communicate what they want and they need it and they know? And if we did that, hallelujah. Because then they have a life where they can belong because they have a way to communicate. And then they don't have to be as frustrated. And then we see reduced behaviors and people want to be around them. And so they're included more in the community. Like it's a beautiful thing. So these are some questions for you to consider. And then just as this last slide, this is my daughter, Shelby. She is 27. She left school 4.5 years ago, where she was fully included from fifth grade through high school. Had she been there today, she would be getting a diploma. That was not available option when she graduated. It was the year before we put that in statute. But Shelby took all the same classes as every single student at that school, and she had access to those standards. She took science, she took math, all those things. And because she had access to that and her peers, we found out that she wasn't at preschool level. She was at second and third grade level in many ways. She was just non-speaking, and we didn't know because we had no way to know what she knew. And, that's on me. Her first, all the way up until fifth grade, she was in home hospital and she had no access to other students. So I definitely know firsthand, which is why I feel impassioned about this and am imparting this on you as now your responsibility too, to make sure the Shelbys in your programs all have access to functional communication. And Shelby used 6 pet cards till she was in 5th grade. Now Shelby uses a communication device with 24 icons and 7 layers. That's a lot more language for someone to say what they want and what they need. And she is very representative of the type of students that are in our programs. Very significantly challenged, but very capable beyond what we ever expected. So Louise says our K-8 districts run their special day classes and our county runs severely handicapped classes. The high school district does all the special education services for 912. So even for the students in the SH classes that some counties still call them, those students too now have access to that high school diploma under the alt pathway. So that's who we're talking about. Significant cognitive disabilities under federal law. California adopted that law in 22. And if you're interested in having your districts or your county know more about it, we're presenting to SECO, which is all your special education administrators of county offices, next month on the alt pathway. So they all know about it and are all working towards making sure our students are getting that access. But that communication piece is obviously important. How do you know what anyone knows if they can't communicate?
That's right. That's right.
Any questions about that or anything else? Does that make sense? And we'll definitely make sure to provide more information on the alt pathway to you too. But you could also ask your local SELPA director, our county SELPA, if you guys wanted like a short presentation on it or something at your board meeting, because they're all aware of the statute and the state resources around it. And then our team at SCOE does a lot of training. We've probably done 100 trainings on the alt pathway in this last year and a half.
Amazing. I've seen them. I can attest to the fact that they are fantastic.
Yeah. And there will be a statewide webinar on it next month that CDE is putting on that will be presenting the same information if you're interested.
Nice.
Michael?
Oh.
Yes, I just have a person. Christine, did you do an IEP up in Chico a few years ago when you were with the state? Seems like I sat on an IEP meeting with you.
I very well could have. I tried to join IEP meetings so that I can understand what folks were experiencing. Yeah, so I probably was.
Nice.
Yeah.
I just want to call out Dr. Patterson's comment in the chat as well, that Placer runs a program for severely challenged students, often with life-threatening conditions, and it's difficult program to visit.
Yeah.
Thanks for putting that in there, Dave.
Yep.
And then I want to also call out Bina's question. Do the county offices of ed on this call run special day classes for K-12? And I wonder, I know we're now over time and we did not leave you any time to talk about those additional agenda items that I saw on your agenda. So sorry about that, Heather. But maybe this question from Bina is a good place for us to pick up part 2 and engage folks and understand what's happening in your county offices. Well, I want to just thank you for taking the time on this evening. And I want to first just thank you for the role that you play at your county offices. We know that it is oftentimes a thankless position and you are giving your personal time. And it is a testament to who you are as humans, the fact that you would give your time, your energy, your talents to bettering the options for the kids and the families in your counties. So I just want to thank you for that. And thank you for spending this evening with us, listening to us, giving us the opportunity to bring our knowledge to you. And we have our contact info here. Feel free at any time to reach out to us with questions or thoughts, or if you heard something that you wanted to talk a little more about, we would be honored to take the time to think through and talk through an issue with you. So with that, Bina, I saw you come off mute. I'll hand it back to you.
Yeah, I just want to thank you guys. I've had the honor of working with Kristen, and she's taught me a lot about the inclusion issue. And I hope for me, it was a big eye opener. So I hope for all of you, you were able to glean something from this conversation. But thank you guys for sharing your expertise with us.
Thanks for being interested and that you all held out here till 8:34 while we're talking about special ed
We're the
stuff.
diehards.
I know. That's a commitment.
I love it.
Great. Thank you both. And just, I put a link to a short 3-question form in the chat. You could give us your feedback on, obviously tonight's presentation was very rich and we have a lot we can follow up to do additional segments on special education. So if you'd please fill that out, that will really help us with the next agendas. And then I want to just remind you, we've got our upcoming in-person meetings and then a ton of training coming up February, March, and April, doing a lot of building trustee excellence. All of these are on our website. And then these links will be live when you access this slide presentation from the web when we post it. So with that, thank you everyone for coming this evening.